Section 3.1, solving quadratic equations. We're going to solve them by graphing. When you solve a quadratic equation by graphing, the zeros, the x-intercepts, are actually your answers. When you can also solve a quadratic by taking the square root of both sides, and you could also solve a quadratic equation by factoring and setting the factors equal to 0 and solving. So graphing is fine. However, if these intercepts don't exactly cross at whole numbers, it's very difficult to know what those points are, as well as you need graphing paper. So I'm going to de-emphasize the graphing part and concentrate more on the square roots of both sides and factoring of both sides. So I want to jump right into some problems. First of all, if you're supposed to solve this equation by factoring, there are different ways to factor. One's a box and diamond method. One is setting up parentheses. I find setting up parentheses the easiest. I'm putting x's in here because x times x is x squared. I know this is a plus and this is a minus, so they have to be negatives in order for the sum to be negative. And now the question is, what are the factors of 12 that when added up together give you 8? And that answer is 6 and 2. Always check the middle term. Negative 6x minus 2x gives you a negative 8x. Once you have this, both this or this could be equal to 0. So in order for the left side to be equal to 0. So you can say both of those equal to 0, and solving for each of those, you get x equals 6 and x equals 2. And if you were to put those into this equation, you would get 0. Other ways of factoring, I won't complete the whole problem, but just remind you on factoring, when you have a situation like this, I like to split it down into 2x and 2x because it's got to equal 4x squared. And then again, think about how can you break this down. It's got to be minus and minus, and it's either 9, 1, 3, 3, and I can see if it's 3, 3, I'm going to get negative 6x. Negative 6x is negative 12x. So the answer here would be x is equal to 3 halves if you set each of those equal to 0. On this one, you would have to multiply by 2 on both sides first, and then bring everything to one side and set it equal to 0. And then you would go ahead and factor this problem. And hopefully that works out. In fact, incidentally, if it doesn't factor, you'd have to use the quadratic formula, which we really like to stay away from. This is going to be, let's see, 8 and 5, 2 and 10. There you go. 2 and 10 works. So it's going to be a minus and a minus, and that's going to be 2 and 10. So your answers would be 2 and 10 here. All right. The other way to do it, solve the equation, is to take the square root of both sides. And to do that, you're essentially solving for x squared. Notice there are no terms that have an x in them. There's no equation that has an x in them. So we're going to go ahead and just solve for my x squared first. This is what I'm solving for. So I'm going to subtract 14 on both sides, multiply by the reciprocal, and this becomes 1x squared equals, let's see, 18 over 2 is 9. And now when you take the square root of both sides, you have to remember, very importantly, to do the plus or minus here. So your answer can be plus or minus 3. Listing them out, negative 3, comma 3. So similarly, you can solve this one, and that's going to be a negative 7x squared equals 7 halves. And if this were negative, you'd have no solution. But again, looking at taking the square root, positive or negative, x is equal to positive negative of 7 halves. And I'm okay with that as an answer. So that's one way to do this. Now notice in number 6, if I divide it through by 2, I get this. And notice that it's equal to a negative 5/2. A square of a number can never equal a negative. So you would write down no solution. Now, when it says find the zeros, such as in this problem, f of x equals this, what that basically means is just factor it and find out where it equals 0. So again, factoring 2x and x, this has to be negative and negative. Now I'm thinking about how do I split this up so that I get 12, and it looks like it's going to be 4 and 3, negative 3x minus 8x is a negative 11x. So the zeros are going to be, and I like writing them down in points. So it's x, well, we'll just go ahead and set them both equal to 0 and solve. 2x equals 3, x is equal to 3/2. So my two answers are going to be the zeros of these. Now, I think the book just says that x is 3/2 and x is 4, but technically the zeros are points. So the best way to answer this is going to be they're the x-intercepts, which is 3/2, 0, and 4, 0. These give the actual zeros as points. And so that's the way I'd like you to write it as well, the zeros as points. That's the way to solve for a quadratic equation or to find the zeros of a function.